I want to talk very briefly about industrial policy at a very high and basic level and explore a couple simple questions in the next 10 minutes, and then we can talk about the rest in the Q&A. Question number one, do we actually need industry? The answer is yes. One of the good parts about talking to this room is I think most of us can assume that we share a view on that, but let's dwell a little bit on the question of why we need industry. Second question, well, if we need it, how do we get it? What is needed? Are the mysterious workings of the market enough? And the answer is no. And if the answer is no, well, then that takes us to the third question, why aren't the mysterious workings of the market enough? And that'll be fun because that lets us get philosophical for a minute. And then lastly, what should we do about it? I'll give you a pitch on one or two policy ideas. Again, I'm assuming one of the good things I think in the development of American political discourse in the last few years is that the question of whether industrial leadership and capacity matters is no longer as contested as it used to be. I think most of us get the joke now that it matters that a nation be able to make things and be able to innovate, but let's just nevertheless review the reasons why. The first is that not all jobs are created equal, and that the capacity to produce things roots regional economies in an essential and unique kind of a way. A lot of folks, I think, criticize the pro-manufacturing, pro-reindustrialization line as being a kind of jobs program. Well, it's not just that we want everybody to have a manufacturing job. It's that manufacturing capacity allows a regional economy to thrive and makes all the other jobs, including all the service jobs around it, better. Second reason is that today's supply chains dictate tomorrow's investment patterns. Supply chains matter. We all know that now post-pandemic. We know that post-China fooling around with our supply of critical minerals, that the resilience of our supply chain has everything to do with a given sector's ability to withstand geopolitical shocks or other kinds of natural shocks, and that redounds to the benefit or not of the American people. Thirdly, innovation follows production. Ricardo Hausmann and Cesar Hidalgo at Harvard and MIT say this, I love this, the essential theory is that countries grow based on the knowledge of making things. It's not years of schooling, it's what are the products that you know how to make. And then lastly, of course, there's a national security component, which again Mike spoke to, about a nation's industrial capacity. The Ronald Reagan Institute issued a report a few years ago, their task force on national security and U.S. manufacturing competitiveness, and they said this, our declining manufacturing competitiveness leaves America's economic infrastructure and defense capabilities underprepared for geopolitical events, global competition, and even major armed conflict. And again, we've seen this recently in the context of trade disputes with China, when China has decided to choke the supply of critical minerals and rare earths to the United States, which is a supply chain they totally dominate and can wield as a tool of geopolitics against the U.S. The Department of Defense said this 2 years ago about semiconductors. The migration of semiconductor manufacturing to the Asia-Pacific region and the subsequent decline in domestic manufacturing represents a substantive security and economic threat for the United States and many allied nations. The production capability has fallen behind foreign counterparts, and we need to do something about it. So for all these reasons, which again I think most of us in the room agree on, a nation's industrial capacity matters, which leads us to question number two, what is then needed to get that industrial capacity? And the answer is policy. There are plenty of examples of this in American history. It's called Silicon Valley rather than Valley someplace else because of the Air Force's preference for the work being done there. Government funding and contracting and procurement is what drove semiconductor development in the 1970s. LCD technology was developed by military-funded researchers at Westinghouse in the 1970s as well, and advanced by ARPA in the 1980s. Everything about the digital age comes from the public-private ecosystem in the United States and public investment in innovation. Europe has good examples too. Airbus has enjoyed $22 billion in subsidies over the last 50 years. What did they get for that investment? Well, Airbus became profitable in the 90s. It surpassed Boeing's market share in 2003. Manufacturing costs are now 15% below what Boeing's costs are, and they dominate the market. We've seen this again in our own country in the CHIPS Act and the success of intervention in that space. Over the next 10 years, chip companies and their related supply chain partners have announced over $300 billion of investment. Construction of manufacturing facilities for computing and electronic devices has increased 15-fold over the last few years. It's my favorite stat about chips. TSMC's investment alone over the next 10 years, which is $65 billion, which averages out to about $6.5 billion a year, not only is that the largest greenfield investment, foreign direct investment in American history, that number by itself is the average level of economy-wide greenfield foreign direct investment total in the 2 years after we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And maybe in the Q&A, we can get to the question of why tax cuts are not sufficient to get the job done. All right, well, why then is policy intervention of one kind or another necessary? And again, this is fun because this lets me quote Adam Smith, which the libertarians hate when we actually remind people what he actually said about how trade works and about how industry works. This is the one and only quote from The Wealth of Nations in which Adam Smith actually references the invisible hand of the market. This is what he actually said. As every individual, therefore, endeavors as much as he can to employ his capital in the support of domestic industry, and direct that industry that its produce may be of greatest value. By preferring the support of domestic to that of foreign industry, in that case, he intends only his own security, and by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, perhaps he intends only his own gain, yet is led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. And this is the point. Adam Smith's view of the invisible hand was not that pursuing whatever serves your private profit motive will always magically, mysteriously, supernaturally, inevitably redound to the public benefit. His point was that sometimes pursuing private profit can redound to the public benefit under certain conditions. And he gives us a really good example of what some of those conditions look like. If you utilize your capital in the pursuit of domestic industry, and in ways that seek productive ends, then yes, of course, pursuing profit in that way will benefit the society in question. And classical economists, I think, made an important mistake. They assumed that a certain kind of patriotic feeling would see to that. David Ricardo said this: "These feelings, which I should be sorry to see weakened, induce most men of property to be satisfied with the low rate of profits in their own country rather than seek a more advantageous employment for their wealth in foreign nations." That assumption, it turns out, was wrong. You can't take it for granted that an American company will care more about American domestic industry than its own profit margins. Private interest does not always equal public interest. You can call that externalities, you can call that market failures, I just call that real life. And the best of America's industrial and technological leaders have understood this. Andy Grove, the legendary former CEO of Intel, said this: "Each company, ruggedly individualistic, does its best to expand efficiently and improve its own profitability. However, our pursuit of our individual businesses, which often involves transferring manufacturing and a great deal of engineering out of the country, has hindered our ability to bring innovations to scale at home. Without scaling, we don't just lose jobs, we lose our hold on new technologies. Losing the ability to scale will ultimately damage our capacity to innovate." Ricardo, as you all know, gave us the theory of comparative advantage, showing how trade can sometimes be mutually beneficial to all parties, and based on what a given country is relatively better or worse at producing. What we're dealing with now, and what we are thankfully finally starting to see change, is a bastardized understanding of that admirable concept. My favorite example of this is Michael Boskin, the chair of President George H.W. Bush's Council on Economic Advisors, who famously is supposed to have said, "Computer chips, potato chips, what's the difference?" there's all the difference in the world for at least two important reasons. One, some industries do matter to the national welfare in a specific kind of a way. Again, as Mike mentioned, some sectors are critical in special ways. Potato chips are not, computer chips are. And the second reason is that comparative advantage in critical industries like semiconductors is not discovered the way Ricardo imagined. It's decided in a complex technological context. It's policy that determines whether a country is relatively better or worse at producing something like a computer chip. This is why Taiwan dominates the production of semiconductors. It's not like an agricultural product in which they have a natural, say, advantage due to climate and soil quality. It's because Taiwan decided that it was going to be the best in the world at producing high-end semiconductors, and then they did it. And so can we. And so have we in the past, so are we now starting to do in important respects. And that's, I think, the critical inflection point that we're at in our politics, is recognizing that the market, left to its own devices, is not going to deliver the critical industrial capacity that we need. Hayek, as you may know, wrote a very good essay called Why I Am Not a Conservative, and this is the reason why, is he advised us to trust in the mysterious magic of the market rather than in the received wisdom of our forebears. And as far as I'm concerned, we are better off trusting the received wisdom of our forebears, like Alexander Hamilton and the other progenitors of the American system, who understood that actually no, policy is required to intervene and see to it, to set the conditions that result in the pursuit of private profit, redounding to the public benefit. Maybe we can keep some of the policy-specific discussions to the Q&A, but two things to flag for you. One is, of course, the question of trade and the essential debate that is happening now over the role of tariffs, in which we can simply decide to decline to let other countries exploit, say, a better regulatory or easier regulatory environment or more easily exploitable workers, simply by imposing a cost on that. We can change the calculus of American business offshoring by imposing a cost on that. And the second is finance. One of the massive ways that the American private sector has failed to invest in our critical capacity, industrial capacity, is in financing it. We invent all kinds of amazing things in the US, and when it's time to produce them at scale, that happens elsewhere in large part because finance doesn't want to invest in it. There are fantastic proposals out there, for example, on an industrial development finance corporation, which would be a standing capacity in which the U.S. can leverage public money in order to unlock a lot more private money and direct it towards the critical industrial investments we need. I'd love to talk more about that in the Q&A. I think we'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much.